So I was not joking. I will ask questions. I would like this to be interactive, okay? And you know what? It's a very risky business. There are so many people sitting here who have known me since I was probably, what, 18? Why not? Oh, okay, you were 15 at that time. But we know each other that long, okay? So it is extremely risky for me to be standing here and talking to you about this topic. Okay, another thing. Since Kamal mentioned, almost all of us are working for some healthcare system. It might be a laboratory. I know somebody who's an administrator and is here. We might be working for a hospital. We might be working in an individual lab setup. Tell me, how many of us feel really safe when there is a patient, an irate patient or an irate relative who raises their voice in your laboratory? I want a show of hands. How many of you feel safe at that point in time? None of you face irate patients? My God. Yeah, so I said I want a show of hands. How many of you feel safe? Nobody feels safe today, right? Healthcare today is a risky business. Today, all accreditation systems you look at across the world have one core thing at their center. Can somebody guess what that is? Patient safety. If you look at all our accreditation standards, be they JCI, be they NABH or NABL, what is at the core of that standard? It is patient safety, right? How do I take this forward? How do I go to the next slide? That's here. Yeah, slide change. Oh, that's, sorry. I need the slide changer, please. Yeah. So how do we define risk? Okay. Now this is a chance of suffering or encountering harm or loss. This harm or loss need not only be the patients. Okay. It could be our staff, it could be our property, it could be anything. So there is a risk of damage to property, there is a risk to staff, and of course there is always a risk to the patient. It can be estimated by combining the probability of occurrence of that harm to the severity of the harm that it can cause, all right. So it is essentially a potential for an error to occur that could lead to either patient or staff harm. If you look at risk management, what is the definition of the word risk management? It is an application of all the management policies, all the procedures, everything that you note down, which we make our SOPs, we make everything, and then we analyze. Somebody spoke about corrective action, preventive action. So if we have an incident, we analyze that. We note down the corrective action, we note down the preventive action, right? We evaluate how bad that incident is, and we also try to control it so that we prevent a similar incident from happening again. What are all these things? You can see one fire extinguisher which is very clearly seen. This is actually a refrigerator temperature record. This is a daily maintenance of an equipment, and this is our IQC chart. What are all these things? Sorry? They are maintenance records, okay. What else? Preventive actions. Exactly. They are all these things that we have been doing. Why are we doing it? Why do we maintain our equipment? Why do we have a, sorry? Okay. Why do we have a fire extinguisher in a department or in a lab? Safety. You want to prevent a fire from occurring, right? Or if there is a fire which has occurred, you want to ensure that it is put off at the earliest, right? So we have been doing a lot of things in the laboratory without realizing that what we are doing is actually risk management, okay? Now if you look at the CLSI document, what it says is that every a good laboratory practice for it asks you to develop a QCP for your own lab. Okay, it's a plan for your laboratory. What all do you have to take into account when you do that? The manufacturer gives you certain information with the equipment. They give you certain information with the kit inserts. Okay? They talk about what could be interference, they could talk about so many other things. They could talk about at what temperature you have to store things, right? Sometimes it is accreditation requirements. ISO 15189 put it into the standard that we need to do risk assessment and we need to manage that risk. So now all of us are scrambling because we don't understand it. We are actually all of us doing it, okay? But we don't know that what we are doing is actually risk management. And of course, what could be the individual healthcare and laboratory setting? My laboratory could have a problem that the temperature keeps increasing, which can affect my test system and it could affect my patient results. All right. So each individual setting can have a different risk. So for developing a QCP, all these things I've already told you which you require, right? After that, you have to document your process flow, right? Document the process flow, and from that process flow, you will get a quality control plan that you need to write down. And after you have written this, you have to monitor that what checks you have put into place to prevent things from going wrong, whether it is working appropriately or not, whether that plan that you have placed, is it correct, accurate, appropriate for your setting or not, okay? And of course, incidents will continue happening. Just because I have a QCP in my laboratory, does it mean that there are no incidents happening in my laboratory? Of course there are, right? I have to keep doing corrective preventive action and try to ensure that there is continual improvement. But sometime when there is an incident which happens, which I feel I have addressed in my QCP, and that incident still occurs, I have to relook my process, okay? I have to try to see if I can put one more check somewhere to prevent it from happening again. Is that clear to everybody? Just because you do this does not mean that you will not have incidents. You will have, okay? But go back, look at it, and just try to ensure that you try to close that loophole, okay? So how do we start? Of course, many of us are looking at accreditation, so 15189 is now asking us to do it, right? And then we just document something because the assessor is going to ask us for it. So what do? Just document something. Even the assessors are floundering themselves. They have no clear-cut idea what they are looking for, what should be done, okay? You look at your user manual, you look at your reagent pack inserts, you look at any other literature that you have at your disposal. Like I said, look at your temperature conditions, ensure that your people are trained appropriately in your SOPs. They are trained in how to handle your equipment. They are trained in how to handle your QC, how to handle your calibrators, and all this needs to be documented properly. Sometimes there are certain allowable performance specifications as per clinical guidelines. Take troponin I for instance, okay? You try to take a kit which has, we are looking at the 99th percentile, right? So we are trying to ensure we do not have too many false positives. Because if we take even our samples and we test it now, we may not necessarily, so how sensitive is your kit? Like the kit I use has a 0.034 as the 99th percentile, okay? But that does not mean that every person who is slightly above that is actually going to have an AMI. So there is an AMI cutoff which is separate from the 99th percentile. So look at your kits, whether they are helping you in ensuring that you don't give away false positive reports too. Now develop a process map. Each process that you have in your laboratory, you can break it down into multiple steps, okay? Document all those steps. Write down all those steps. At each step, try to find any potential failure that could cause some risk to your patient. Here, I would also like to say, try to see if it caused some risk to your environment or even to your staff, okay? I'll tell you the reason why when I go to the next slide. So you have to document, you have to actually document the entire process flow, all right. Look at what controls and checks you can put in place to prevent errors. At each of those steps, and it will be a long, tedious, and to some extent, you know, you will think, why am I doing this? But look at each step. It will be something as simple as, you know, labeling a Vacutainer, all right. In the hospital, we have a major problem because not all samples are collected by the laboratory. There are some samples which are collected by nursing staff, all right. What they do is, there would be a barcode or a label put on a Vacutainer. By the time they collect the patient's sample, the doctor has cancelled the investigation, or for some reason the patient has gone somewhere for a radiology investigation, so the patient is not on his bed. What do? They will not take the label off. They will keep it in a drawer. What will the next nurse who comes for collection do? She'll pick up that Vacutainer. There is a label on it, right? She goes, she collects sample of another patient, but she does not change the label. And what I am actually quoting are facts which have happened, all right. And then they will send that Vacutainer down to us. Now, how we caught that was because we kept trying to, the patient was not in the system, patient had got discharged, the one which was with the previous label, and we kept searching for the patient in the system and we were not getting the patient. So how do we accept that sample? We couldn't accept it in the laboratory. So when we backtracked, went back to ask them, how did you get this barcode out of the system? So she says, no, it was already there on it. I forgot to put the new barcode. Till then the patient, that previous patient got discharged, and got discharged in a matter of hours. Huh? So we were under the impression that other patient is also still in the hospital. So we picked it up because, just because the system did not show that patient in our hospital. So view all the pre-analytical, analytical and post-analytical areas of the laboratory. So you don't do it only for the analytical bit. Major errors happen in the laboratory in which phase? Pre-analytical. For chain labs, it's as bad because your samples are coming from so far sometimes. For hospital laboratories, as challenging, okay. Only standalone laboratories, if you are you have only walk-in patients, maybe you are a little better off. But everybody has, Parag is laughing. So you are definitely going to concentrate on the pre-analytical phase first. Now this is a process flow that we have defined. I know it is going to be a little difficult for you all to read, but for me to just put the whole thing on the slide was very, very tough. It is, I know, a little blurred. But this is about, in our industry, a medical emergency is called a code blue because you do not want to set off a panic when you make a public announcement that there is a fire somewhere in the hospital. So you always use terminology by now, but everybody's become very smart, so they understand what a code red is. So there is a code red for a fire, a code blue is for a medical emergency, so on and so forth. We have a code orange which is for hazardous material. Okay, so this is our process flow for a code red. All right. Now, if somebody suspects a fire or a fire has already occurred, they are supposed to start following the fire protocol. They are supposed to activate a certain code. They do that by calling up a certain number and at the same time trying to ensure that people in that area have evacuated. Okay. Now, each step, that where does that call go? It goes to the security staff, it goes to the EPBX which is going to make the public announcement, all right. So they are supposed to do. Now at each of these steps, can somebody do something that is wrong, that can go wrong? First of all, the panic that sets in when somebody sees a fire. How many of our staff know how to handle a fire extinguisher? We train, we retrain. But attrition being what it is, you will always have some challenges of new people being there. People after training, when they see a fire or when they are even told that it's a dummy code, okay, we are just doing a mock drill. And if you tell them, okay, it's a code red, there is a fire over here, what are you going to do now? Do you know what they dial? They'll dial for a medical emergency. They will not dial 111. So you have the ICU team coming with all its paraphernalia. You tell them to start telling you how to use the fire extinguisher, everybody's hands start trembling. So the training has to be so good that it sets into a motion, a cascade of events which is ingrained into them and it is second nature to them. So that if God forbid there is an emergency like that, they do things exactly the way they are supposed to do. And believe me, they don't. Believe me, they don't. During assessments in front of an assessor, everything goes for a toss. I would just request someone at the end of 35 minutes to please tell me that there are only 5 minutes remaining. Okay. So at each of these steps, there are things which can go wrong. Write down what you think can go wrong. Okay. And write down what you think can prevent it from going wrong. Both the things you write down. All right. Now this is another process flow. This is about hazardous material. Here if you see, the number is different. Those of you who can see the number, it's a different number. So we have different codes, so different numbers have to be dialed. And our major problem starts here because they dial the wrong number. Then each of these each of these steps, think what could go wrong and document what you feel you can prevent it from happening. Another way of doing it. Now the fishbone or the Ishikawa chart is also used to get to the root cause analysis of something, right? Now, like I said, for me, my major problem is in the pre-analytical phase. So it could be a hemolytic sample, icteric sample or a turbid sample. There could be some interference, some other interference besides these. It could be a clotted sample, because they do that. They are taught how to use vacutainers, but when they join initially and they are not confident, what they do is they will collect it in a needle and syringe, they will open the vacutainer tops, they will push, I can see people nodding, so it's happening at your places too, yeah? So they'll open those tops, they'll push the blood sample in it and they will exchange the tops. And they will cover the whole vacutainer with the label, so I cannot even make out what is the line on that. And we are waiting for the plain sample to actually clot, and it just doesn't clot. So you tear the label away and then you see that it is actually some other thing. So that could be another wrong vacutainers. Every time a new lot of nurses comes in, they either try to call up the lab to ask in what they should collect, all right, or they collect in the wrong vacutainer and send, very confident in the fact that they are doing the right thing, all right. There could be bubbles, there could be short volume, or sometimes in coagulation tests even overfilled vacutainers, right. The staff needs to be trained, they need to be competent, and you need to have adequate numbers of staff, okay. Because working with short staff in a high intensity environment like a hospital laboratory, believe me, the number of errors will definitely go up, all right. Environment, temperature, humidity, dust, water quality. I am lucky I have dry chemistry, not every one of us is that lucky. And some places in Mumbai have very hard, or even in the peripheries have very hard water, okay. So that is definitely going to affect your results. Electric supply, fire and spills, all right. So there could also be things which will go wrong with your reagent, QC material or your calibrator, okay. It could be shipping issues, it could be the way you have stored them after they have come into your system, how your staff prepares it, all right. And also sometimes using expired reagents. Why? Because the QC is coming correct. So I will use that expired reagent and give away patient results. Maintenance, there could be something wrong with the optics, contamination could be there, failure of hardware or software, okay. Now, what an individualized quality control actually requires is that all the three phases of testing, you look at all three. In each of these, you do the risk assessment, all right. Then you put in a QCP, you put in a quality control plan. And last but not the least is, please assess whether that is working for you or not working for you. You can see it, whether it is working or not working. If you keep having multiple incidents despite putting a QCP in place, your QCP is not effective, okay. So you will identify the failures like I showed you, their causes, review your process map, fishbone, sometimes it could be the manufacturer's instructions, assess each thing where a failure could occur, add an element to your QCP. Like I said, what you are actually now documenting after the process flow is what your QCP is. Okay, this is the risk, this is what could go wrong, this is how I can prevent it from happening. Okay. For some types of failures, the test system may already have a quality check in place. Okay, one disclaimer which I didn't give, I am a user of OCD, there is no other conflict of interest. Okay, I use Vitros products. Now for me, if you look at all these things, now suppose, and this is for a lot of you when you all are choosing equipment for your own labs, what do? We look at pricing. That becomes the top consideration for us, not a bad thing to do. But if there are certain value adds in that proposition where the system actually helps you, look out for these two. Pricing, yes, of course, very important. Now, especially prices of testing is going to be, tests are also going to be capped, very important. But look out for these small things also, okay? Now, I have something that is called smart metering. What does that ensure? It detects clots, it detects bubbles, it senses the level of the liquid, okay, when the probe gets into the vacutainer. It detects short samples, and if the sample is very viscous, it detects that also and ensures no carryover. So, it actually prevents the processing of any insufficient or defective samples, and it gives us a notification that there are bubbles or there is a clot. Okay. So, this in itself reduces the potential for error. My staff will not process that sample. Actually, the system does not allow them to process that sample. Okay. Again, there is a microsensor technology which will detect and flag these. By and large, adult patients, no problem in getting a repeat sample. But those of us who have neonates, very, very difficult. Give away those reports with a very, very bold disclaimer that it was a hemolyzed sample. Okay. Then there is the software itself is called IntelliCheck. It's because it's an intelligent software, right? What does it? I'll tell you what it does. So basically, it provides real-time process monitoring and control. So if a sample has been added, at the end of it, I get an audit trail. Okay, sample added or not? Check. Yes, added. Was the buffer added or not? There is a check. So every reagent, when it is added on, the system lets me know. Remember when we used to do those ELISA practice, those, you know, yeah, and a technician gets a call. He attends that call. When he comes back, he doesn't know what he has added to what, isn't it? So all these things can definitely be prevented. It performs and verifies diagnostic checks throughout the sample and assay processing. And documented traceability is available to minimize errors. During sample processing, it tells me whether how the tip has been taken or not. It tells me the sample metering, how volume of the sample, okay, clot detection, bubble detection, viscosity, and even diluent volume, whether the correct diluent volume has been dispensed or not. I get to know that. It also tells me whether the reagent has been picked up or not, sample and reagent mixed or not, okay, well washed, dispensed or not, signal reagent, luminometer, so on and so forth. Everything is available to me in this Intelli report. All right. I don't know how many of you can read it, but if you look at this, clot, no, bubble, no, short sample, no, viscosity error, no. So it just lets me know every step of what has happened, right? Now construct this table that I have been telling you and see which types of errors you are detecting and which ones you are not. Believe me, the ones you are picking up is fine, but let your imagination run wild a little bit. The ones you are getting, the errors that have occurred in your lab, you are aware of. What you are not aware of is those which are potential. They can occur, but have not yet happened. So you have to be careful there. Yeah. This is in our, I have an integrated system from them, which is biochemistry, immunology and serology. Not hemat, not hemat. This is not hemat. Yeah. Okay. And for each possible failure, assess the possibility of that failure. How frequently, if it can happen, how frequently can it happen? Okay. Assess the frequency, assess the severity. Like I said, it is, you know, you have to multiply these two factors. Assess detectability, whether you are able to pick up those errors or not. All right. And then you multiply all these things. Now, these are standard things which are available. If you look at the net, you will see this. Now, if I may tell you something that is frequent, in my lab it may occur every week 3 times. But what standard definition for a frequent thing is something that happens more than once a week. All right. Probable, once every few months. Occasional, once a year. Remote is once every few years. Improbable is absolutely no chance that something like that can happen. But remember, you decide what you want to do, and you decide it can be different for different tests also, and different for different testing systems also. Like hematology, you may decide to have something else, biochemistry something else. Okay? So, do not make it a one size fits every section of the laboratory, it does not work like that. Severity, again catastrophic, it results in a patient death. Okay? Critical, again permanent injury to life or something that is a life threatening injury. Serious, results in injury or impairment which requires medical intervention. So, you have to give that person some amount of medical intervention. Minor, it results in temporary injury or impairment not requiring any person to actually give some kind of a medical intervention. Negligible, temporary discomfort, कुछ लग गया, थोड़ी देर के बाद वो पेन अपने आप कम हो जाता है, right? Detectability. Now here it works opposite, right? When it is one, so it's a high detectability. So you can control and you can detect the failure, right? As we come up, it's low and the control is ineffective. What you need to do is you need to multiply these things. So something that is probable and catastrophic, first of all, it requires urgent intervention from your side. It requires urgent intervention from your side, that you are unable to detect something that can cause a catastrophic, remember the definition of catastrophic? Death to the patient. So, patient safety is hugely compromised. So, you need to definitely be able to ensure that these are the things which you tackle first. Okay? Low criticality is less than 10, mid is 10 to 20 and high is more than 20. Okay? So, the higher criticality numbers should always have some action documented. Now, this is the acceptability matrix, frequent and catastrophic. Okay? Frequent and catastrophic, absolutely anything that is catastrophic is unacceptable. Anything that is frequent, even if it is a minor thing, but it is happening frequently, that means you are not looking at your processes. You can prevent this from happening. You say, ये तो हमारे यहाँ रोज होता है. रोज क्यों होता है? अगर आपको पता है ये रोज हो रहा है तो do something about it. It may be negligible, okay? It does not really cause any harm, but you need to ensure that everything that is frequent and everything that is catastrophic is tackled first, then move on to the other things. Okay? Oh my God, this is not visible? Okay, yeah, this is. Okay, this is something that is out of my QCP, right? Like I said, because I have so much help from my analyzer, my analytical bit is pretty small, but my pre-analytical and post-analytical is higher. I mean, I have done more work on that. Incorrect patient identification, right? What is the hazard? You give away wrong reports. What is the risk? Patient is treated, wrong treatment is given to the patient, tomorrow somebody will sue you. Okay? Existing controls, we have an SOP for correct patient identification. SOP may be there, staff has to follow it, no? So, you need to ensure staff training. You need to ensure competency assessment of that staff, right? Now, what is the likelihood of it happening? When I started making this QCP, just look at the likelihood. It was high, right? 4. Remember that table of that likelihood. Consequences for me were very bad, all right? Now imagine, there are some of you, somebody mentioned are from a blood bank, right? Imagine if you get a mislabeled sample in your blood bank, which is a different group from the intended patients, and you give away a wrong unit of blood or blood products, and the kind of catastrophic outcome, okay, that in itself should make us very, very careful about these things. So the consequences can also be pretty bad. So if you see the score of these two is 16, right? So it's a high risk, but we have good risk control in place. After that, other things that we did, we ensured that every patient that we identify in the hospital, whether it is for collecting a sample, whether it is for giving a drug, whether it is for giving any kind of blood or blood product, whether it is taking the patient for a surgery and identifying the patient at the in the OT, everywhere we use 2 patient identifiers. Believe me, big challenge. I work in an area where Salim can be the first name, Salim can be the last name, Salim is even the surname. So if you go only by one Salim, and incidents have actually happened. That was when we got really serious about this, and all our IP patients have wristbands. So everybody who does any intervention on the patient, it might be as simple as a blood collection, is supposed to look at that, look at the label on the bar or the barcode on this, and ensure that it is going into the right Vacutainer. Okay. Lab staff and also nursing staff have to check this ID band before they collect the sample. So do we have this SOP? Yes, we do. Is it implemented? Yes. And after that, we realized that we have fall in the incidence of wrong patient identification. Now this was another thing, blood sample collected in an incorrect Vacutainer. We used to keep rejecting those samples, asking for repeats. That leads to more irritation on the nursing staff's front also, and even on the lab staff front. They keep arguing and fighting with each other. Nursing staff will say, okay, we collect, now you come up and collect. And lab staff will say, you made the mistake, now you collect. So then we have to step in and say, okay, whoever did this, now either whichever one is free, go and collect, but I need the sample because I have to give the report. Now what we have done is that the directory of services is available on the intranet, and also in that we have said which type of sample. It is mapped against each test in our HIS. So they don't have to ask 10 different people which Vacutainer I should collect it in, which Vacutainer. So each test, if they click, it shows them in how much volume and in which Vacutainer they are supposed to collect it. Okay. We also maintain a record of the rejected samples, and we share this with the nursing leadership team that look, they are still doing this. So then training of course keeps happening. So the likelihood 3, consequences 2, it's not a very serious thing because we are rejecting the sample outright, right? So we don't allow it to get processed. So the score is 6, it's a moderate score, we have good controls in place, and after that we realized we have again now reduced the number of incidents which are happening. Sorry, 5 minutes more, thank you so much. Okay, critical alert values not informed in time. Now this in our setting is absolutely a no-no. Nobody will tolerate that critical alert values are not informed. It's okay that they don't pick up the phone and do not take the call, but we at least have to have proof that we made the call. It can lead to an adverse patient outcome. You are reporting a potassium of 9 and you can't wait. If one person has not picked up the phone, you need to call up somebody else and inform them. Okay. So we have an SOP, staff training. We also do clinical audits. Now in this what we do is we also audit whether some corrective action was taken for this critical alert value which was informed. Now this is there in the NABH standard. So we actually then need to fulfill even this criteria. Likelihood of it happening 3, consequences very bad for patient. So it's a 12, which is a high risk. We have good controls in place, and we do the clinical audit. So I do have evidence that they are informed and the clinician has taken some kind of a corrective action in this. Okay. good outcomes for us over here too. So document it, use the information gathered from the process mapping and the fishbone, and include all the actions that you have identified in your QCP. And then monitor, please monitor it for effectiveness. So errors will happen. Do a root cause. For the root cause also you can use the fishbone. Okay? Actually the fishbone it was designed for identifying root cause and identifying the root cause of any kind of error. Take corrective preventive action, and once the cause is understood, evaluate whether any changes need to be made in the QCP. QCP cannot be sacrosanct, ek baar bana diya, chhod diya. It has to be a dynamic thing. Every time something happens, you have to go back and look at it if you can improve upon it. Okay? Another very important thing, monitor complaints, because this is how you pick up what is going wrong in your laboratory. Okay? Review QCP regularly and please amend as required. So from my side, the take home message is very simple. We are all doing it. It's just that we are not aware that we are doing it. What we are doing is risk management. So we identify, we assess also, and we manage, but we do not know that this is risk management. Okay? Formal documentation requirement is relatively new because accreditation also has now made it compulsory. There is no guarantee. Please remember that. QCP bana diya to error nahi hoga. Not possible. Okay? There is no guarantee that you will completely eliminate the risk of anything going wrong in your laboratory or no errors happening if you have the QCP. However, implementation definitely does reduce the risk. It has definitely, in our case, reduced the risk. It definitely enhances patient safety and ensures quality care to the patient. Okay. Any questions? Heavy topic, no? Post-lunch. But I'm glad, I think most of you stayed awake. Thank you. If there are no questions, then I think, yeah. But like I said, look at all the other features. That is not this assessment. Your this assessment starts after you have put it in your hand. So before you purchase, you can put certain clauses in, that please see if it can help me detect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So you can do that. That depends on your specifications. See, what are the specifications? When you're buying any instrument, what are you looking for? So you start a risk assessment process after your instrument is in place. Your test system is with you. Now what all? Sorry? Yeah, exactly. Before this, that's what I'm saying, you specify. Whoever is purchasing, you specify to them that please look for these additions, whether the system is helping me in any of these. That's the most we can do. If you are the master of your lab, you can buy whatever you want. But those of us who are working for a company or a lab or a hospital, we by and large have to even work with whatever is given to us. So in that case, after you have the instrument, you start documenting. Okay? Thank you. Yeah?
Yes.
Whatever critical values we are, reporting to the clinicians, like in your setup, like in hospital setup, we have to, it is easy to do, but it is difficult.
NABL is not
it's not asking you to, but actually we should have an interaction with clinicians, right?
Should, very important.
So, and how to take, we can, whenever we arrange some meetings with the clinicians, then we can have a feedback from them.
Yes.
Or like we can get some feedback forms given to them so that they can tell us.
If they fill it in, well and good. The more documentation
Right.
you give them to do, they will not do it. But
No,
somebody
not documentation,
at that,
but
yeah.
at least we can give them it's once in a year or twice in a year. We can do that.
You can do that, definitely.
So that we come to know where we
Yes.
can improve while communicating with them.
See,
while
you know what
giving us
happens over
services.
here is that very many times we know our SOPs, that if it is a high potassium, what all they start. If sugar is high, what they do to the patient. Our SOPs, everything is on the intranet. So anybody and everybody can do this audit. I don't have to tell them, look for this, look for this, look for this. Okay. So in this, what happens when you try to do it in a standalone laboratory, your challenge will be non-uniformity of
doing.
And sometimes it happens that you know the history of patient, whatever patient is, whatever is going on with the patient. But in standalone labs, sometimes they are not even ready to give us what we want.
Exactly. That's
and
exactly
sometimes
what I'm saying.
clinician is also not available to tell us what.
That's exactly what I mean. So for us, it is much easier in a hospital setting. For you all, it will be a big challenge.
And we have to wait for clinician to come on board and let us know what is happening.
But when you meet your clinicians, maybe you can, you know, at least start off the process and speak to them about it.
Yeah, we actually speak to them
Yeah.
on a regular basis whenever we have such problems in analysis and all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a nice interactive session. Now, I would like to request Amol to come here to hand over appreciation token to madam.